Hello and welcome to the Wake Up with Gratitude podcast. I'm your host, Julie Boyer, and today I'm welcoming back Adele Anderson. Hi, Adele.
Hello, Julie. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you're back. And you have been through a lot since you were last on the podcast. So just to bring everyone up to speed, because they may or may not have heard your podcast, because it was in my first year of the podcast where you shared your really incredible near-death experience after a small plane crash. And what I'm going to do is, because we're not going to spend a lot of time there on this podcast, I'm going to share the link in the show notes. I'm also going to share the link to the YouTube video, because the video of us doing our interview has been very popular on YouTube because it is such an incredibly powerful story. So that is still to this day my, best performing YouTube video, because it's a topic that people find obviously very interesting, which has led to some of the work that you're doing now. So just to reintroduce Adele where she is now. So she is a life and death coach, celebrating all aspects of living and dying and helping grieving families find grace, grounding, and growth. Now, Adele lost her husband of 30 years in June of 2021. And we're recording this in, just the end of March 2022. So it's still very new and fresh and in the process. And so first, Adele, I just want to say, I am sorry for your loss. And I also want to give you space for where you are right now, and also say thank you for your bravery, for taking your experience as you're going through it and giving back to others at the same time. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you. It's a passionate journey for me. And I've found grounding in helping other people traverse and heal themselves through these types of catastrophic losses.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting time we're in, right? It's an interesting time for loss.
Yes.
A lot of loss, not only of life, but so many losses in so many ways, grief showing up in so many ways. And, one of the themes that I talk about a lot in my work around gratitude is that gratitude and grief can live in the same house. And so when you spoke to me and said, Julie, I really would love for us to have another conversation around this, I was like, absolutely. I want to bring this conversation back to the table, back into the podcast, because right now, so many of my listeners even if it's not a loss of life, there's grief going on. So tell me a little bit about, where that has been a part of this journey over the past, not even a year for you.
Mm-hmm. So, we entered that period of separation from everyone. So we were more limited with the amount of people that could gather. Even planning his celebration of life, it was in the summer, but it was the only day, I think, in 3 months that it rained, it poured, but we were prepared. But within that, I say that Willis and I had probably the best year of our 30-year marriage. He made a choice when he got sick and he knew that he was going to die, that he would do it with grace and with gratitude. And he never said an unkind word. We had super deep conversations about topics we had never had before. And, I always say it was a year worth dying for.
Oh, okay. Just give me a moment there. That's, whew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I didn't know how much you wanted to get into the, how he died and stuff. So just, he had a terminal illness and he kind of knew there was a limited amount of time. Is that what happened?
Yeah. He ended up being diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And it's one of the worst cancers that you can get, pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
And even though they said that he was a prime candidate for survival, things went wrong on the medical side, and which ended up delaying his treatment until his body became too ravaged to survive the chemo, The cure killed him, put it that way.
Ugh, yeah.
But, he really showed his strength, and he was always a very kind and thoughtful person.
Mhm.
But within his illness, I became sick for a couple of days and I really felt my own irritation rise up. We know that grief is very connected to anger, irritability. I mean, you can even say rage. But Willis didn't display any of that. And when I showed my own gratitude to him being such a good patient, he said, I made a choice. And I am a choice advocate, within all of the work that I do, and we do make a choice, and sticking with those choices and our ontology for embodying that is something pretty remarkable when you are going through not only the loss of your own life, but being able to maintain that sense of inner peace and calm as you are engaging with other people. And so I just saw his personal strength as a remarkable part of himself.
When you say choice, I mean, choice has become a very, almost like can be a polarizing word in our world today, right? People
Yeah.
feeling like they don't have choices or their choices are being taken away from them.
Yeah.
And this coming back to this decision of the personal choice to how he reacted in that situation, I mean, it is an incredible gift. And, you've been a coach, and I know you're a real expert in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Is that correct?
Neuro-linguistics program.
Neuro-linguistics programming. I don't want to say it incorrectly because it's interesting. That was one of the questions that I would get a lot on our video was like, what does NLP stand for? So just wanted to clear that up right from the beginning. So you can't, you come into this situation as you, with all that you bring to it and all your background and the way the brain works and the way our language works and the way you coach people. And then your husband shows up in his way as well. And with different choices. And like you said, in that moment when you got sick and you felt that anger and the irritability almost right away, and yet he never displayed that for an entire year. So, you are doing very different coaching now. You are connecting with people in a different way. And is that specifically connected to the experience you went through in that year? How do you think that your work has evolved?
Mm-hmm. Well, from my earlier podcast, you knew that I had a near-death experience. And even though I wasn't pronounced dead at the scene, if you look at the criteria and the common themes with near-death experiences, I had 9 out of 10 out of them. And so I really believe that it was a near-death experience. I had a choice to come back into my body, and I made that choice. So I believe that there was something beyond this life. And I did interview a lot of people that had had near-death experience in that 30-year period. But then when Willis died, all of that came into question. So, our belief systems, even though we think we have a foundation, sometimes they can be shattered by these deeply emotional experiences. So it didn't actually help me through the grief process. And I found that I had many tools to help myself, through my coaching tools and particularly through neuro-linguistics programming, the ability to desensitize emotion and, rise out of the pain. But I felt my soul was broken. And I always say that grief is a body, mind, and soul recovery. And I just got my sister-in-law sent me a little thing on Facebook Messenger today that said, we don't overcome grief. We just learn to swim in the ocean. Like, it's so many people say, I feel like I'm drowning. So it comes back to my plane crash, which is quite funny. And then I always say, well, these are the tools that are going to allow you to just come up and take a breath and stop feeling like you're drowning. But these are the aspects of it. People want us to move on because it's uncomfortable for them to see us suffer. And yet we don't move on. We grow within it. And part of what I do, of course, is shift my signature language. And of course, the first thing that came from being the wife of someone who died was I became a widow. And I said, well, I'm going to shift that, because that comes with a whole like a whole bag of tricks, right? And so now I say I'm a wife of an angel. And that just shifts how I feel about my connection with Willis, and it's not lost. It took me connecting on a spiritual level, and I cannot be grateful enough for the spiritual journey that I deepened through the process of losing my husband. I feel more connected to the universe. I feel more connected to life. I feel more joy from that. And I definitely feel grateful that even the grief process has become rocket fuel for my personal growth. I feel like I'm not the same person anymore, but that doesn't mean I'm not whole. I'm very whole and complete, and feel, body, mind, and soul wholeness.
There's a lot you shared, and so I'm going to pause for a moment and gather my own thoughts a little bit. It's so interesting to me. I find that when those of us who, there are the ways that we show up in the world is the way that we show up in the world. And when you've made a decision from a young age or whatever it is, or whatever time you make the decision to that personal growth is a part of your journey, that the continuing of growth is a part of your journey, it colors the perspective of how different experiences affect you. And when you said, that there is still this idea that we're supposed to get over grief, like that. It's so interesting, because that's just not, I don't know anybody who got over grief. Like, you never forget someone you lost. In high school, I had a friend who, took her own life. I still think about that friend. I'm not in it, I'm not there, but that person still like comes into my mind every once in a while. It's not like I got over losing that friend. I carry a little piece of that with me for the rest of my life. I'm not drowning in it. But I'm able to it's a little part of who I am. And so I always find that very interesting when that comes up of this, oh, just get over it. And I will say, I speak from a place of privilege of having yet to lose someone very close to me. So that is a place of privilege. So my experience in that grief of losing someone close in that way, I have not experienced yet. I will.
We all will.
Yeah.
And it will be a shock. Because I had many girlfriends that had lost their husbands or, had tragedy in their lives. Been a long time since it had happened to me, my grandparents, but that was decades before. Yeah. And so I'd overcome that. But I had no realization of the depth of what grief is when you lose a significant part of your life. And losing a partner is everything changes. It's like I was pulling 2 plates out for dinner for 3 months after he had gone. And, these habits that you have of just living with someone. But what I wanted to do is just go back a few steps there, because when we talk about getting over, or, think of any emotion as just trapped energy. The same as, everything on the planet is energy. So our thoughts and our emotions are also energy. And so this is how we can relieve them. And this is like removing the label. But I just want to caution, like you had an experience of losing a friend, and, she has a little part within your heart. And that's different than someone who doesn't shift or release that grief energy. If we think of energy similar to a physical ailment, there is a chronicity that can happen. So if we leave our emotion of grief unchecked for, say, 2 months, it becomes a mindset. And if we allow that energy of grief to be a mindset for 4 months, which is the chronic month period of a physical illness, it can become a personality trait. And this is where we have witnessed within probably everybody within a group of friends and family, or someone that you know or know of, that never got over something. And when I say never got over it, it's getting over the pain of the emotion,
Right.
the physical pain, anxiety, emotional entanglement to that deep loss. And that's where it's so important for us to understand that grief is not a lifestyle. You know, we are meant to grow through the deepest experiences throughout our life. And this is when we grow. We don't grow. This is like basic psychology. So many of you already know that we grow through challenge.
Yeah.
And something that is dropped to your knees painful is an opportunity for us to go to the moon growth. And that's where I encourage, it's not about losing the love or leaving the love that you have for that person behind. That's a completely different thing than the grief that you feel.
Post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Post-traumatic growth. It's becoming a more understood term that, and there's a choice in that, right?
Mm.
And I think this, you even said it actually when you were talking about your experience, is that there were lessons going through the experience. Like when those of us who are aware that post-traumatic growth is a thing, that we grow through our challenges, often when we're in a difficult situation or it's still fresh, we're asking ourselves the question, like, where am I learning from this? Like, where is the growth in this? Even though we may not want to, like at that moment in time, like we don't want to find the growth, we don't want to look for it, but it's this awareness that it's part of that human experience, part of the journey. Yeah, it's interesting. I had a moment there where you were just talking about being trapped in grief and not being able to move through that emotion. You know, it kind of brings me back to, you know, having a couple of miscarriages and how I don't wish that on anyone. And I also don't wish it had been different for me, because from those experiences is where I was able to grow. And really, for me, understanding gratitude and the true power of gratitude.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I practice gratitude every single day. It is a lifesaver. It's a lifeline for me. Because of course we know the positive mindset behind gratitude, and then how it can ease the physiology within our body. So grief does come with a lot of anxiety. It comes with, you know, a lot of different emotions. There's, you know, a whole bag of ugliness that can be part of it. There's low bandwidth as far as coping. There can be anger, there can be rage. It's not necessarily, don't take it personally if someone who's grieving gets angry. And I just encourage people to recognize that part of the planet, the anger that's on the planet right now, is because there's so many people grieving the loss of, their way of life and their way of being. And then, this whole Ukraine situation, which is just so tragic. But people are grieving, and we might not recognize the signs of grief, but a heavy sigh can be a sign of grief. Outbursts of anger where it takes you by surprise can be a sign of grief. Low coping mechanisms can be a sign of grief. So if you're experiencing some of these emotions that are rising up and you're like, where did that come from? Consider that you might be grieving. And so the solution is found in a different way. But gratitude will start to, shift your mindset towards the things that, we are so privileged to have. And we can really use that word in a gratitude type of way. You know, we have food in the fridge, we might have a vehicle, gas in our vehicle, the sun is shining, you know, a flower comes up through the ground, we hear a child's laughter. We can go into some of the simplest things. And one of the sayings that always stuck with me was, if the only thing that you had in your life tomorrow were the things that you were grateful for today, what would those things be? And we can get down to the basics of being human and really be grateful for what we have, not for what we want. And I think this is, you know, part of the journey. Like, I'm grateful that I was with Willis for 30 years. You know, he was such a beautiful person and we shared so much love. I really feel like it's a soul connection. And what I have changed being with him for 30 years, just because I could avoid this painful emotional state that I'm in right now, well, I wouldn't change it for anything, right? So we can get back into just being grateful.
I think acknowledging that the load of grief that the world is carrying right now is very heavy, beyond the millions of people whose lives are lost to COVID, like physical, like they're no longer here on this plane. But like you said, the loss of a life that we had, I think we're at the point now where it's, you know, well understood that there is no going back. There will never, it reminds me a little bit of, you know, a world where we used to fly before 9/11 and the world in which you fly post 9/11. It never went back. It completely changed the way that we flew on an airplane, which doesn't even apply to the large majority of the world, but that was forever changed. That one moment in time forever changed the way that we experience air flight. Well, even if you just look at air transportation, you know, in a COVID world, I don't say post-COVID world, because in where I stand on a education scientific epidemiology thing, like that's just not going to exist. It will either, you know, there's a lot going on that I'm not going to get into on this, but you know, the world is never going to go back. And this lack of acknowledging of grief, I think, is holding a lot of people in anger or frustration, and they're just not aware of it. So I'm glad you brought that up, because someone listening right now is like, she's talking about me, right? So what does that person do? So that person who just went, Adele, that's me. Like, I am really angry and frustrated. It comes out of nowhere. What do you tell that person?
Well, there is hope that emotions are simply trapped energy. And so if we consider even if we look at scientist Robert Lanza, who's compared to Einstein, he's probably one of the leading scientists in the world right now. And he has converted some of quantum physics theories that were inconsistent as far as, time and space. And so we know now time and space don't exist. And we can get into that makes life and death not existing, but eternal. And he talks about even the cadaver. If we want to talk about what do we do with energy, shifting energy? Well, we're complete energy. Even our bodies that are, post-death, that stark reality when we think someone has gone somewhere, we say, oh, well, they're gone. So what is it that is gone? Because we could chop off our arms and our legs and we'd still be us. And so, how much can we remove of the physical body before we're not us anymore? We can get into the reality of consciousness and awareness. But there was an interesting little conversation that I was listening to on an audiobook, and talking about just energy in general and the bioplasma of a human body. An average size cadaver has enough bioplasmic energy to light all of the light bulbs in the US for 2.5 years. And so when we think of ourselves as just, this flesh and bone existence, and, for all the people that have gone, I truly believe, and the science supports, that life is eternal. So yes, there's no longer the physical aspect of them being here, but there's so much evidence that there's something beyond what we see at first glance. And that's a scientific, the research is in, and there's 50 years of resuscitation research, of near-death experience research, and now biocentrism, where we know that there's so many tools that human beings use to make sense of their world, and time and space is one of those, and life and death is another. But they're simply tools for us to use, and they're not necessarily used in a way that makes sense of eternity.
Okay, I have a few questions. What was the name of the author of that book that you mentioned?
So he's a scientist. His name is Dr. Robert Lanza.
Okay.
And he switched out quantum theory. He took the physics out of it and put biology into the equations. And so then everything worked. And so he has a science form that's called biocentrism.
I was going to ask you what that meant. I was like, what is biocentrism? Okay, not something I've heard before. So please explain that. Yeah, as best you can.
Well, yeah, I believe that it's using biology as the fundamental building block, and then recognizing that, it's everything is energy.
Yeah. Yes.
So okay. I have a few articles that I wrote about it. I'm not an expert, so it's a new field for me to understand, but it certainly gives us a lot of information about, even Einstein said it long ago, that, it's just life and death is simply a persistent illusion for us. And then Robert Lanza says that there is no time and space, so there is no life or death. It's simply eternal. And so we use these old belief systems and sometimes get trapped in it. And then within that, we get trapped in the pain of our grief because we don't see that person. We can't hold their hand or share a meal. And yet, there's so much more if we choose to lean into that. And there's a great Netflix series out right now. It's called Tyler Henry, Life After Death.
Yeah.
And he's just this young guy. Yeah. He's so sweet. And he's a medium. And, he gets dropped into homes where he doesn't know who these people are. He doesn't know who he's going to meet, knows nothing absolutely about them, but he's able to communicate with beings on the other side of, maybe it's just a different plane of existence. And so, I encourage people, if you are struggling with your grief, to encourage the wonder within your belief systems. And, what is the difference between us sort of being in a day of frustration and looking at our computer to going outside and watching the sunrise or watching a sunset, right? All of a sudden we have this internal, just this feeling of wonder that we're so much more connected. And we find that in nature a lot. Yeah. And so if you are grieving, I would encourage you to just be curious about why you feel the way you do when you are, gazing at the infiniteness of, I can see your beautiful sunrises behind you. Because it's your thing, right?
It is my thing. You are correct. It's so interesting. You mentioned Life After Death. I started watching that on Netflix as well. And I really, it's so wonderful. And because I've also had a near-death experience, it's easier for me to just totally be like, yep, that's what he's doing is totally possible and real, and it's happening. And I think that does help. But like, there's something you said there, which is a lot of how, I don't remember where I'd heard this before, but that we are all energy. We are beings of energy. And within this vast universe that we have, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It is simply change into an other form. And so the way that I think of it is that, our form might go right now, but the essence of us, that spirit, that soul remains. And there are lots of different ways that I think about that, for sure. I lean on a lot of what, Wayne Dyer's teachings. I really enjoy his work very much. As well as just some of my own experiences as well, having kind of seen what happens a little bit on the other side, or my own connection through at the time, which was a connection where, Jesus came to me in my experience, which is, it's interesting that you mentioned it's like, look at your own belief systems and how that is serving or maybe not serving you in the way that you're looking at grief or loss or what happens when we die or our energetic body. And maybe that belief isn't serving you, right?
Mhm.
That's possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think everyone, knows body, mind, and soul. Well, what exactly does that mean? And what does it mean if we're not going to, I guess, feeling incomplete in that area?
Mm.
So what part of your soul is not connecting to your life right now? Are we just body, mind? It's,
Yeah.
we always talk about the trilogy, body, mind, and soul. So
Yeah.
what part of your spirituality might be unplugged? And it can be different than religion and those beliefs from, different theology. But, the spiritualness of just being human, the wonder of it, and take it from there.
Well, and this connectedness to nature as well. So, Wayne Dyer explains this analogy, and I don't know if it was his idea or where it came from, but about the pie, right? So when you have a complete pie, and then you take a slice from that pie, no matter how small it is, it's still pie. And so we are made of the stuff of the universe, right? We are a collection of atoms and molecules and elements that come from the universe. So then how are we not part of it? Does the universe not live within ourselves as well? Because we are still, the pie is still the pie. We are simply a very small, we could be a crumb, and yet we are still the pie. So when he explained it in that way, for me, it really helped me to understand my personal connection to the vast, incredible universe that is, which means that in my mind, all humans are connected energetically in a way. And like you said, you're going to the beach and watching a sunrise. It reminds me that this sunrise, it's not happening for me, but it is like this beautiful shared human experience where at any moment in time, so many of us are connected through just watching the sun do what it does without asking questions.
Yeah. Within biocentrism, they understand that, the universe is intelligent. That they went through in one of the chapters. I just have loved this book, and he's got a great sense of humor. But he says, like, if you tried the coincidence of creating planet Earth with the moon moving in a certain trajectory and the sun moving around that, and all the different aspects of what it takes to have life on the planet, the probability doesn't exist. And so the fact that the universe is actually conscious and intelligent, and that we're a part of it. And it was interesting, the pie metaphor that you used, and getting back to this idea of, we are energy. And again, he gave the metaphor of, again, you talked about the molecules, the quarks, the atoms within, and then the space that is between the space of those, which we hear Dr. Dispenza talk about that. And he said, if you break that cadaver down into the black space that's between the atoms and the molecules, the amount of physical biomass is too small to even see with a microscope. So literally, like, we see this collection of who we look like in the mirror, or the desk in front of us, or the computer that we're using. And they say, it's just an illusion. Yeah. We're really creating things for a period of time, but really it's ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and back to the earth we shall go. And these old sayings, well, what do they actually mean? What do they actually mean? And then, we can understand this, maybe the simplicity of life, that we agree that, we're here in this form for a period of time, and then we're something else. And why should we have that stark, I had another analogy of, everything in life is the circle, right? And then we think of life and death as this flat line. It's like, the circle of life, the circle of whatever. And then all of a sudden we have this belief of this stop line. It just doesn't make sense in so many ways, but it did give me comfort once I made that deep spiritual connection with Willis on the other side and really embodied my own spirituality. I embodied peace. And I'm not saying that I'm not still traveling through what I call firsts and casseroles, but I am nowhere struggling like I was struggling in the beginning. And I pay homage and am grateful for the spiritual tools that I was able to gather and utilize every single day to bring myself back into feeling whole again.
Adele, I adore you. I thank you for your bravery to speak. Your energy is very infectious in a good way, of just this hopefulness and this this ability to move through grief and acknowledge that, again, you're still in it and you're still in the first, the casserole has not yet been a year since you lost him. But you have come back and are working with clients in different ways. So tell me a little bit about how you are working with clients, how you're showing up these days to serve your community.
Well, I'll give you a link if people do want to come for a rainbow energy session. This is actually showing them how energy in the form of an emotion can be shifted and transformed into what I call rocket fuel, to fuel the life of joy. So we're shifting that energy and liberating the joy within you. And this is why we feel so exhausted with grief, because a lot of our energy is tied up in that emotion. And it's heavy, as we know. It's hard to get out of bed. So this is where my work is organically transferred, because people were like, oh my God, I have an aunt that just lost her husband, or, I have a friend whose daughter is just not thriving after losing her mother. Can she see you? So yes, I'm working one-on-one with clients. I'm just about to launch what I'm calling Firsts and Casseroles. Heal your heart, nourish your soul. And this will be a program, a group program that people will be able to go through all of their firsts. So it'll be once to twice a month, depending on how that rolls out. But watch for it. I think it'll be great. It's going to support people through those, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the family events, the seasonal celebrations, which can drop you to your knees. And we just don't want you to live there. So it's like throwing you a life buoy and allowing you to come up for air and feel like you're going to be okay. And it's okay to feel joy. And it's okay to not be okay, but just don't, it's not a lifestyle, right? So we want you to, be back in your life and thinking about the future that's ahead of you, because that's where your loved one would want you to be, right? And just to realize that there are support systems out there for you, and to please reach out.
And what is your website?
Well, I'm going to give you just a link, because
a link. Okay.
the website is being revamped.
Rebuilt. Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
But we can also find you on social media too.
Totally. Yeah. And those links I believe you have, and I'll resend them. So I'm on Facebook. I did blog my experience of losing Willis, and lots of people have found some relief in those, just putting into words what it feels like to have these catastrophic losses, and then how to rise out of that deep emotional state.
Thank you, Adele.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for what you shared with us today. And, to our listeners, thank you for honoring this time with us. And hopefully there are some of the things that Adele shared today that have piqued your curiosity and are inviting you. I feel like this is a real invitation, Adele, to explore not only grief and gratitude, but also different ways of thinking about what happens after death and our existence here. There's just a lot of beautiful ways that you are inviting people to just do some exploration. So thank you very much. I'm so grateful for you and so glad that you said yes to coming back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very grateful as well. I'm grateful to share. I'm grateful to help. And I just think it's a conversation that is often left unhad or unsaid. And yet it's so valuable because we're all moving through, the ups and downs of life. And then what do we do with it?
Thank you, Adele.